Should you create your user interface programmatically or with Interface Builder? If you do a little bit of Googling, you'll be met with articles with headlines like these. Life without Interface Builder. Why I don't use Storyboard. Why I fell out of love with Storyboards. You get the idea. Let me tell you, I was a huge advocate of building the UI programmatically. In fact, in my last workplace, I led the movement to build all of our UI programmatically for all of our projects. But now I am a huge fan of Interface Builder and Storyboards, and in this video, I'll tell you why. I'll also tell you what you should be using depending on what type of person you are. Stay tuned. Welcome to Code with Chris, the place to be if you want to learn how to make an app. I'm Chris and I'm so glad you're here. Now, just in case you don't know what we're talking about in this video, take a look at this button. I can do it through code like this, or I can do it through Xcode's Visual Interface Builder. Which method is better? Well, to answer that question, we need to look at some cold, hard facts. Number one, it's tough to get the entire picture with Interface Builder. Chris, what are you talking about? It's laid out all there, man. Yes, but there are a ton of options, checkboxes, and drop-downs in Interface Builder. I have to click into every single element and look through all of these options just to see if you've changed anything. And then don't forget, for each element, there is still a size inspector and an identity inspector as well. With the programmatic UI, it's easy because I can just read every single line of code and I can see what you're changing to that element. If you don't have a line of code changing a specific property for that element, then I know that that value hasn't changed. Number two, loading storyboards in Xcode is notoriously slow. In Xcode, when you try to open up a storyboard, it's going to take a couple of seconds to load before you can work with it. And that wait time is going to get longer as your storyboard gets more and more bloated. Now, this issue can be lessened a little bit if you split your storyboards up into smaller storyboards, which you should be doing anyways as a best practice when you're working with storyboards. To be honest, this isn't going to bug you much when you're a beginner, but as your skill level gets higher and higher, it's going to become increasingly frustrating because at that point, Xcode can't keep up with you. Number three, when you're working in a team, it's easier to resolve conflicts with a programmatic UI. If two people modify the same piece of code in the same file, then you're going to get a conflict. But that's all right because it's very easy to look at the two offending lines of code and decide how to merge them or which ones to keep. With a conflict in the storyboard, however, you're going to be looking at two pieces of XML and you're going to have to be able to interpret what they mean so you can decide how to resolve that conflict. And reading and understanding that underlying XML of the storyboard is not easy because it's not always human readable, so that adds to the difficulty. Okay, so I know it's looking pretty bad for Interface Builder now, but let's put some on the scoreboard for it, shall we? Number four, Interface Builder is faster for constructing a UI. If you're building a UI from scratch and you're familiar with using Interface Builder, I've got to say that specifying constraints in Interface Builder is a lot faster than having to type out all that code. I mean, take a look at me centering this button. If I were to code these constraints out, I'd have to type this. There's an interesting video by Voong of Let's Build That App, where he times himself building the same UI using Interface Builder and then again doing it purely in code. I'm not going to spoil it for you, but do note that he is using some custom extensions that allow him to specify auto layout constraints in code without typing out that much code. Number five, storyboards are great at conveying a sense of the app's flow. For a new person jumping onto an existing project, glancing at the storyboard can tell a lot about how the screens flow from one to the next. But if it's a purely coded UI, you're going to have to take a little more time to look at the code and understand what's going on. So now you might be thinking, programmatic UI is the winner. Well, no. It depends who you're talking to. When I was learning iOS app development, I found Interface Builder confusing and buggy. I felt like I was at the mercy of its quirks and glitches. Do keep in mind that this was back in Xcode 3 and it's come a long way. Whereas when I wrote code to generate the UI, I felt like I was in control and it felt like I was at home. So that's what I did. I built all of my UI programmatically. I think part of why it felt so natural to me was because I had a programming background. That's what I did. I wrote code for a living, so I felt very comfortable with it. Since I was the first and only person at the company who worked with iOS, as our team grew, everyone followed the same trend. They built all of the UI programmatically. That is, until one day, Kiavash came in. He was trained in the ways of the storyboard, And poor guy, he didn't stand a chance. His arguments for using Interface Builder in Storyboards just didn't hold up against the rest of us. I think we were about 6 guys at that point, so it was 6 versus 1. In the end, we converted him and he had to work our way because that's the way the rest of the team was doing it. When I left the company to teach iOS, I realized what a godsend Storyboards and Interface Builder was. Try telling someone who's never written a single line of code that in order to put a button on the screen, they had to type this out. I began to realize that for beginners with no programming experience, learning how to code is friggin' intimidating, and it's hugely psychological as well. It's like when they start out, they have this breaking point, and each time they get frustrated, it builds up. If they reach this breaking point, they just give up and they abandon learning iOS. However, as the learner makes small wins and little accomplishments, that tolerance gets higher and higher until they've gone deep enough and they start to find it fun. Then, that's when the breaking point disappears altogether. So that's why I use Storyboards and Interface Builder in all of my teaching, because most of my audience is just starting out. And I know they're going to eventually reach a point where they're comfortable with code, and then they can start learning to build their user interfaces programmatically. In fact, in all of Apple's beginner guides, they use Storyboards as well. So back to the original question, should you build your user interface programmatically or with Interface Builder? If you're a beginner who has never coded before, start with Storyboards. If you're a beginner in iOS development but you have prior coding experience, start with Programmatic UI. I think you'll feel much more at home. If you're working in a team environment, you have to roll with whatever technique that project is using, but if it's a fresh project, I would recommend the programmatic method. This also implies that you need to know how to work with both the programmatic approach and the storyboard approach. And finally, if you're working solo, then do whatever makes you happy. And don't forget, it doesn't have to be so black and white. If you're working on a solo project and you feel a lot more comfortable with storyboards, go ahead, you do you. And if you want to do a little bit of programmatic UI with a little bit of storyboard, you can do that too. In fact, Sean Allen has this method called Skeletal Storyboards. Go check out that video. Now, if you want to learn iOS development with a step-by-step plan using storyboards, then you have to check out my beginner playlist. Just click on that short playlist that you see on your screen right there, and I'll see you over in those videos. Okay, and that's a wrap.